So thanks Marike for the nice introduction, and as Marike already said, we have a very nice, or particularly Marike put together a very nice program already, which is very dense and there are lots of interesting things to be done and to be said. That's why I like to keep it very brief. What I like to do is very briefly say a few words about the LinkedUp project. Another reason why I can keep it very brief is because I actually have quite a lot of information already here. So the room is pretty much LinkedUp branded as far as I can see. So LinkedUp was sort of the context from which many of the activities in the Open Education Working Group, the activities Marike already mentioned, actually originate from. My name is Stefan Dietze, as Marike already said. I'm in fact the coordinator of LinkedUp, so it's also a bit of a personal matter to me. I'm a researcher, senior researcher at the Alfred Research Center in Hanover, which is a small research lab, more on the technical side of things. So we're basically looking into web science, data science related topics, doing a lot of semantic web related research as well. And there we go. So to start very briefly with some kind of motivation. So one, let's say, kind of observation, or one kind of, let's say, situation which was sort of at the background for LinkedUp was the fact that, as Marike already said in her presentation, there is in fact quite a lot of content, resources, data out there which is very useful for any form of educational purposes, right? When you think about open educational resources, we have heard some people are coming more from the OER side of things as well. There have been millions of resources being made available in the last decade. Distance universities started to release content very much the more recent and pretty much hype MOOCs phenomenon. And sort of right in the middle is something called linked open data, which is sort of on the one hand producing or contributing some kind of knowledge resources in their own right, which can be really useful for education as well. While on the other hand also provide some technical principles which can really help bringing all these different bits and pieces together. And this is very much what LinkedUp is about. So LinkedUp is a European funded support action, which means it's not a pure research project, but really a project which also focuses on creating communities, bringing people together. We have in principle 6 partners, which are very well represented here today. So LVS Research Center is coordinator, Open University is represented with Mathieu and Alessandro here today as well. Another Open University from the Netherlands, in fact, unfortunately not here today. Elsevier as a content provider and sort of also as a technology provider. Marike from the Open Knowledge Foundation, doing a very great job, particularly on the community building. Lattanzio Learning, you will hear a bit more from Elisabetta later on, who's representing Lattanzio, which is an SME, a small company from Italy, dealing with educational-related technologies. As Marike also already mentioned, we are in fact working also with quite a lot of other organizations, pretty much any kind of organization which is doing something relevant, related, more from the technical side, more from the, let's say, educational side. So when you look at our network, which is pretty much expanding continuously, there are collaborations going on with quite a lot of different organizations ranging from companies, broadcasters, universities, research labs and the like. I've highlighted to some extent the Common Wave of Learning, which was also introduced by Marike already, since they were sort of being a bit behind the motivation for organizing this workshop, basically because they are an NGO based in Canada, but pretty much trying to promote open educational principles in the developing world, third world countries and the like. So it's a very related, interesting organization in this context. Dance NL, I also felt so free to highlight a tiny bit, since we are basically collaborating with 2 Christophs, or basically one Christoph and one Christoph, if I'm not mistaken. The other Christoph unfortunately couldn't make it here today. Christoph Dendorf, I think, will also talk later today a bit. And I think that's pretty much what I wanted to say about the partners. There's quite some delay here. To briefly say a few words about the kind of activities which we're actually working on. So in principle, I try to summarize it in 3 different kind of pillars. One is more the technical work, which is pretty much about curating data sets for education, making them more accessible for developers, anyone who wants to actually use data for educational purposes. The second one, which is probably the more or the most visible one, is related to our Linked Up Challenge, which you all should have some flyers as well on your table about the Vici competition, which in fact is part of the Linked Up Challenge as well. So here the idea is to actually go a step further, not just exposing data and basically providing technical support to developers, but also providing monetary incentives, but of course also any kind of other support for anyone who's building nice applications, doing nice stuff with open data, particularly in educational related settings. And as I've mentioned, since we're a support action type of project, community building and really bringing different people from different communities, more the educationist side, more the developer side, and computer scientists and the like together is a very important part of our work as well. And that's also why we are organizing exactly events like that here today, and we're pretty much organizing quite a lot of workshops, tutorials, very often co-located with major conferences, simply to take advantage of the critical mass which you usually meet at these kind of events here as well. Wow. Okay, so one very brief excursion. So I've mentioned our data curation activity, so I just wanted to point to some environments which were, let's say, the more technical outcomes of the project, which are related to our linked up dataset catalog. So what we're doing here is pretty much we're manually curating a set of datasets which is useful for building education applications. So basically you find all sorts of OER metadata repositories being listed there, data coming from universities about courses, course offerings, experts, and the like. And we're basically assembling them, ensuring that there's some kind of, let's say, at least availability of these kind of data sets, and we are trying to provide mechanisms to make these data sets more accessible to others, so in particular building on linked data principles. And we're also mapping different vocabulary schemas in order to have a more holistic view of these kind of data sets. You can basically run distributed or federated queries across these different data sets. What you see here at the bottom is there a very messy graph, but you can actually zoom in and explore it manually as well. Here the idea is to, for instance, provide some more topic-based view on different data sets, right? So to basically explore data sets according to what kind of domains, topics they're actually providing. For instance, if you look for data sets for biology or computer science or whatsoever, that's a good entry point, because here you basically have some kind of topic mappings for all these different data sets. Okay. So I've mentioned our Linked Up Challenge already. So here the main idea is really to support people who are doing something nice with open data and education, not necessarily only data which we have in our catalog, but in principle any kind of knowledge resource which is available out there. And the main idea is basically that we are not having the challenge, but in fact a series of 3 different competitions. Veni, Vidi, Vici, easy to confuse. In fact, what happens quite often, we are actually right now right in the middle of the Vidi stage. That means we've sort of finished the evaluation. We're still waiting of some audience votes there as well. We're going to have some ceremonies, some awards, and some sessions at the ESWC in Crete in less than 2 weeks, I think. The picture you see here is, for instance, from the Vini competition, the final award ceremony at the Open Knowledge conference in Geneva last year. It's probably the most heavily shown picture in the linked up context, simply because it's mainly happy people, happy faces, and it was a very nice event. In fact, in case anyone is actually interested in contributing to the Linked Up Challenge, we've just released some initial information about the Vici competition as well. So if you go to linkedupchallenge.org, there's some information. The actual final descriptions of the different tracks are still yet to be released, probably in the next 1 or 2 weeks. But I guess the basics and everything you need to know is already there, and we are accepting submissions until 5th of September. And yeah, hopefully maybe 1 or 2 submissions from the round here in this room is arriving there as well. That was pretty much what I wanted to say. 2 links to some of the resources, basically the Linked Up project website, the Linked Up Challenge website. One, let's say, main conclusion or takeaway, I think, for Linked Up is very much that we are trying to bring these different communities, in particular data providers, developers, and end users closer together. And in particular, when you think about, for instance, the first stages of the Linked Up project, I think we did a very great job in particularly embedding and bringing closer together data providers and developers. That's also what we see when we look at the actual applications. Very much having a, let's say, developed by developers using certain data sets, not necessarily in all cases really with a clear use case or user focus in mind. I think that's happening very often in these kind of contexts. It's quite natural. So what I think is very much the focus of this workshop and also for the final stages of Linked Up is particularly focusing on the second gap, which is between actual developers and the actual end users. So really bringing the end users more into the picture, in particular teachers, tutors, learners. And that's why I also personally very much like the use case, which we are talking here about today, or particularly the context, which is open education in the developing world, because here I think there are some clear user needs, some clear use cases, and sketching these out more in order to really have a closer link between linked up activities, applications, and actually these kind of real-world scenarios, I think is something really worthwhile to do, very interesting. And that's also why I'm very much looking forward to the rest of the day here. So I wish us all a very interactive workshop, and I think you want to follow up.
Thanks.